What times? Oh, holy crap, I might want to actually start talking about the book. So again, the Ellimist Chronicles opens with the Ellimist visiting one of the Animorphs right before they die to tell his story. We're not told which of the Animorphs it is, but at one point the Ellimist refers to them as a happy accident, implying that this is not one of the Animorphs the Ellimist intentionally positioned in his game with the Krayak, which, if you read Megamorphs number 4, Back to Before, narrows it down to either Jake or Rachel. The dying Animorph gives no commentary throughout the book, only saying stuff in the prologue and epilogue. Our story finally begins thousands of years ago on the planet Ket. The surface of Ket is an uninhabitable lava wasteland, only fit for climatic Jedi duels. However, high above the surface, there are these island-sized balls of crystal, and on these crystals live the ketrins. The description of the ketrins are kind of vague. They have wings, they have pods, they have 4 eyes and 2 arms. Outside of that, who knows? If you like fan art of these guys, you'll find some wildly different interpretations. The ketrins keep the crystal afloat by latching onto it and beating their wings. Imagine 100,000 hummingbirds latching onto your car and lifting it to the heavens. No, I have no idea how evolution resulted in this. The crystal, of course, has amazing properties. It gradually grows, and I think the ketrins eat crystal. I'm honestly not clear on that. In any case, they maintain the growth and shape of their floating homes into spheres. And then, the ketrins are capable of linking their minds with some kind of electrical current to access something called the Uninet, which allows for quick communication among the crystals, the storing of information, and even Matrix-esque simulations. It's organic internet, basically. And on the Uninet, you can play video games. And this is where we meet the Ellimist. My name is Azure Level 7 Spar Extension 2 Down Messenger 41. My chosen name is Tumen. I like the sound of the word, which is all the reason you need for a chosen name. My game name is Ellemist. Like Tumen, it doesn't mean anything in particular. I just thought it sounded breezy. Never occurred to me when I chose the name that it would follow me for so long and so far. Yes, the Ellimist got his start being a nerdy teenager playing games online. The Ellimist is a gamer, an idea that K. Applegate might not have made if they wrote this book last year. We only get to see one of these games, which is kind of like a more hands-off version of Spore. 2 players watch over 2 different primitive civilizations, make one tiny change to their environment or their genetics, and then fast forward millions of years to see how those civilizations developed. It's kind of like if in Sid Meier's Civilization you made exactly one decision and sat there while the rest of the game autoplayed itself. Well, that can't be it, can it? Ellimist, did you pick this up on Steam Greenlight? You know getting early access games is a bad investment. I bet it was a Kickstarter game too, riding on the nostalgia of some mid-90s god game before Konami fired its creators and turned the property into a slot machine. Yep, stick around, folks. The rest of this video is just going to be video game jokes. There's a couple of big events going on right now. The Ellimist lives on the Equatorial High Crystal, one of the many island-sized crystals floating around and orbiting around the surface of Ket. And in a week, another one of these crystals, the Polar Orbit High Crystal, will be floating close enough for the 2 populations to fly over and visit each other, something that happens once every 19 years. Yeah, these crystal populations remain pretty isolated from each other, so this event, which is called the Dance By, is as much a time to laugh at the weird foreigners as it is about brief socializing. The other big thing going on is the Mapping Crystal Quadrant 3, or the MC. This is the first Ketrin spacecraft, a Starship Enterprise-sized crystal with a Z-space engine, force fields because the Ketrins are going to be riding on the outside because they have no concept of inside, and anti-grav boosters to keep it afloat in atmospheres. I actually really like this ship's design, if just because it's a starship where you ride on the outside of it. But I do have one question. While the base of the ship is another magic crystal, pretty much everything added to it seems to be some other material, including metal. Where are these guys getting this stuff? There's no mining operations on this planet. The Ketrin don't go down to the surface and shift through the lava, so where's all this metal coming from? How are they smelting it? How are they working it into engines and anti-gravity machines? Oh, I totally buy that the Ketrins understand the science involved, they can work it all out on the Uninet, but this is a pretty impressive feat for a species with zero industry to speak of. Now, to be fair, the Ketrin have made contact with other alien races. A species called Generation 9561 made first contact with them some years ago, but we never see any of them, and there's no mention of trade between the two races. What would the Ketrin have to trade anyway? All they have are crystals. It's a crystal palooza with these guys. If you download Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles into the Uninet, the first thing they say is that there aren't enough crystals in it. Of course, this ship needs to be staffed, so the Ketrin set up a 2-tier system to staff it. First, there's the Essential Staff, which are the smartest and most capable Ketrins to run the ship, and the Non-Essentials, basically the interns to be apprenticed in the ship's functions and go out for coffee runs. The non-essentials are decided from a pool of volunteers, and the Ellemist is one of hundreds who have put his name into the Goblet of Fire. He doesn't think it likely, however, since there's a lot of smart, talented people trying to get on, and he's just a guy with no ambitions who sits around playing video games. He isn't even very good at video games. He loses the one game we see in this book. He has a conversation with one of his keeping the crystal floating neighbors, a scientist named Lakava, as in Lakava alien name generators, so we'll pull out a random book and use the first 3 words on a random page. Lakava is pretty dismissive of the kid. I don't share this fascination with games, Lakava said. Any game that can be played can be deconstructed. You can always deduce the laws, assuming you pay attention. And once you know the rules that ensure victory, what's the interest? It's all software. Software is software is software. Boring. I was peeved at this. It seemed to imply that I wasn't quite bright enough to understand the game. Alien Civilization isn't just software. It's the most sophisticated game ever released. It has more than 1 million scenarios. Oh, really? Because I heard that no matter what your choice is, you wind up with the exact same ending with a different color filter over it. They're gonna fix that in DLC, I swear! So the Ketrins are allowed to fly around at certain times, so when the Ellemist's break period comes up, he takes off to reflect on his situation. By his own admission, he really hasn't taken any steps to improve himself. He hasn't picked up a field to educate himself in, he's just locked into a constant world of Doritos and Mountain Dew. With the MC about to take off, he realizes he needs to fix that. He needs to get off his ass and start applying to colleges and become a constructive part of American society. Tomorrow, after this next game. He finds a group of his gamer friends. Redfar Inidar was there waiting, zooming lazily with Escobat, whose game name was Wormer, and Dofnal, a rare female gamer who used the game name Aguela. Well, maybe they wouldn't be so rare if every time they boot up Crystal Call of Crystal Duty, there's a bunch of douchebags telling these girls to make them crystal sandwiches. Be nice if all these female Ketrin characters weren't always dressed in skimpy outfits and getting punched in the stomach and kidnapped. But you point that out, and all the male Ketrins get up in arms. Some of them start sending Ketrin SWAT teams to female gamers because they said something on a Uninet blog. Then they say it's all about ethics in Uninet journalism and not all male Ketrins, and it's just a big angry mess. Man, sure sounds silly when aliens are doing it, doesn't it? So the Ellemist and his gamer buddies wait for the Ketrin leaders to announce who's been selected for the spaceflight, and lo and behold, both Aguela and the Ellemist get selected. Aguela makes sense, she's a grade A student, but the Ellemist is more of a head-scratcher. We later learn that the Ellemist was sponsored by none other than Lakava. Why? Because the Ellemist is really good at being really bad at video games. I have developed a morbid curiosity about your failures, Tumen. I'm a biologist, so I have access to your DNA map. You are, in fact, 194th in the rankings. Your loss earlier has bumped you 15 slots. Ouch. But in terms of pure analytical intelligence, you are very near the peak. I am. Yes, and don't play coy with me. You know you're smarter than gamers that beat you regularly. You lose games you should win, not deliberately, but stubbornly. You're playing the game at a different level. Not trying to win with kindness. Altruism. I was embarrassed. amazed that Lakoff had been paying attention to me at a level that I never suspected. "Anyway," Lakoff said, "we have a number of brilliant scientists, brilliant analysts, brilliant communicators, brilliant theoreticians, brilliant physicists, brilliant techs, and brilliant astronomers on board the MCQ-3. I asked myself what we didn't have, and the answer came to me. We had no brilliant losers. So yes, I sponsored you. Now please shut up, I have work to do." My mind goes back to an old Far Side comic, where two parents watch their kids play Nintendo and imagine a future where those skills in video games would end up being applicable to the kid's adult life. The Ellimist Chronicles continues a 2-decade tradition of fiction, where people who were good at video games found those skills applicable to some kind of fantastical adventure. The two biggest examples of this were Tron and The Last Starfighter. What's interesting is that this idea stopped being fantasy or a joke on the funny pages when people started realizing video game skills could be applicable and profitable in real life. Well, okay, a lot of people still don't take this very seriously, and possibly the worst version of this idea came out as a film just this summer. But that doesn't change the fact that the military use video games as training tools, that you can learn things like new languages through video games, and we now live in an entertainment-based economy that allows people to make decent money filming themselves playing video games. That Far Side comic wound up being pretty prophetic. But why is this even an idea for this book? This leads into my biggest issue on the subject of the Ketrins. They're too human. Despite the fact that their evolutionary path led to a point where their culture, their morality, their values, and their politics should be totally alien to ours, the story here is one that is entirely relatable. Despite being on an alien world of floating crystal islands, what we end up with is a story of an insecure teenager who realizes that he has no idea what he wants to do with his life. So he joins the military, and then he starts having emotional feelings towards a girl right around the time he's worrying about getting a date for the big dance. The first 6 chapters of this book don't feel like an Animorphs book. They feel like, One Tree Hill. In space! Of course, most of the aliens and Animorphs have at least somewhat relatable traits. You can understand the motivation of a Hork-Bajir pretty easily, but it still has an identity and culture unique to anything on Earth. A culture formed on the basis of genetics, environment, and history. The only idea really alien about the Ketrin is that they have virtually no concept of being inside something. They spend their days resting on the outside of things, which is a cool concept, but it's all the book has to offer. Otherwise, the Ketrin might as well be human. They even use blatant human expressions. For example, here's a taunt the Ellemist uses during the game at the beginning of the book. "Oh, well, step into my lair," said the Dreth to the Chorkant. This is, of course, a riff on the very human phrase, "Will you walk into my parlor," said the spider to the fly, just with the noun swapped out with garbage syllables. You never learn what a Dreth or a Chorkant is, so the only cultural context you have for this line is its human origin. And it's not just a phrase, it's a quote. It's the first line of a poem published in the early 19th century called The Spider and the Fly by Mary Howitt. Imagine some popular song lyric from today becomes a common repeated phrase over the years. Then 150 years from now, someone writes a science fiction book where an alien, completely removed from human society, says, "You look so perfect standing there in my Gnorgnob Cthulhu underwear." It's not presented as some subtle joke, it's just a word-replaced human quote for this alien conversation. They weren't even trying. Are aliens who act remotely alien that much to ask? So we have that dance by thing. The polar orbit high crystal flies in, and there are 2 things of note. One, they're not a perfect sphere, like the equatorial high crystal. Instead, they've been slowly shaping it to include an airfoil. The other is that they seem to have a crude form of democracy in place. I'd get more into this, but as you'll soon see, neither of these things matter to this book. What does matter? The Ellemist getting all male-gazy at Aguella. Aguella, being female, was faster than me, of course, but she restrained her impatience to allow me to keep up. I rode her wind, staying just behind her. This had the advantage of offering me a view that included both the amazing soon-to-be airfoil and Aguella herself. She had lovely pods. Not the point, Tumen, I thought. Not really what you need to be thinking about right now. Moans. She was spreading the moans for me. For me? No, surely not. Aguella could have any male she wanted. She was beautiful, well-formed, sturdy, intelligent, funny, beautiful, very beautiful. That was several too many beautifuls, I said to myself. It was true then. Aguella was spreading moans, and I was helpless in her slipstream. Spoiler warnings, Aguella is technically the Ellemist's love interest, and that relationship is based entirely around physical attraction, or the Ellemist's physical attraction to Aguella. She really doesn't have a character here. We're told she's a focused thinker and a good student, but we don't actually see any of that, and she's pretty much just an accessory throughout her time in the book. Easily the worst romance of the 4 Chronicles books, and that includes Aldrea and Dakhami, Scholastic's first hate-fuck couple. Actually, the Ellimist Chronicles has the weakest supporting cast of the 4 Chronicles books as well. Oh, geez, we really need to get this gravy train going, don't we? So they have the dance by, they get trained in operations on the ship, and then the Ellimist learns what this mission is all about. It seems 2 years ago, a mysterious ship appeared out of Z-space, about 1 million miles away from Ket, which in astrological terms means they're peeking in through the bathroom window. The Ketrins secretly sent a drone to check it out, but it was destroyed. They did manage to steal some data from their computers because all alien computer systems are compatible with each other, and we learn that this is an automated ship from a race called the Capucins, who appear to be super nervous and retaliate against the most minor of provocations. So the MC is going to try and find their planet and hope they can negotiate some peace. All well and good, but the Capucins decide to push that meeting forward a bit. As the Ellemist and Aguella are getting crystal welding lessons on the ship, this happens. She beat wing and elevated to the other pair of amateurs she was supervising. Aguella and I shared a sigh of relief that she was gone. And then, Equatorial High Crystal blew apart. A hammer blow on my head. Wings snapped back on the concussion. Spinning. Fire. Fire everywhere. 1 second I was working and grinning at Aguella, and in the next instant my ears were bleeding, my eyes swimming, my mind was a mess of shattered bits and pieces. A Capucin warship flies in from nowhere and gets in a few quick blasts. The Ellemist's home crystal gets destroyed, the thousands of people living on it killed. Only those on the MC survive, though many are injured from shrapnel, including Aguella, taking her out of the story for a while. The Capucin ship spits out a little fighter to take pot shots at the MC, but the Ellimist has enough of his wits left to grab a spear-length chunk of crystal, fly above the Capucin fighter, and plunge it through the roof, impaling the monster inside. For all their technological advancements, the Capucins making their fighters out of Reynolds wrap may not have been the best idea. The fighter and the Ellimist crash land onto the MC, which hightails it out of there into Z-space. The Ketrin leadership is a mess. They have no idea what provoked this attack and no idea what to do. They eventually decide to return to Ket to see if they can find survivors from other crystals. But the Ketrins are a non-violent race at heart, so the MC has no weapons. The only thing they have is the Capucin fighter, and nobody knows how to fly it. If only someone had learned how to be adaptive through video games. Yeah, they patch up the fighter and put Ellemist in charge of shooting lasers and stuff, since he's now considered the first Ketrin to have killed somebody. This is a two-person job, and the natural pick for co-pilot would be Aguella, the book's ham-fisted love interest, and just as skilled at video games as the Ellemist. But the book put her on the bench for really no good reason, so instead Lakova, a biologist, climbs into the co-pilot seat. It's tense because of the looming threat of violence, and because Ketrins don't like to be inside things. It's like genetic claustrophobia. So the MC returns to Ket to find it burning, most of the crystal islands destroyed. The Capucin fighter is closing in on the polar orbit high crystal, so the Ellimist and Lakova attack. The tiny fighter actually kicks the giant warship's ass, because I guess bug fighters are a step up in the history of spacecraft integrity. So the survivors of the Polar Orbit High Crystal butt heads with the crew of the MC, their radical democracy coming in conflict with the MC's old school, wise old one leadership structure. But eventually they get on topic. That topic? Why the Capucins are attacking in the first place. One of the Polar Orbit guys, a ketrin named Menno, thinks he has an answer. "We linked to a zero-space transponder," Menno said proudly. "We're a century ahead of you Equatorials, you know. We can punch a signal through the background radiation, and we can bounce it through Z-space. In 10 years, we'd have had a full airfoil crystal and been the hub of a global Uninet. And soon thereafter, we could have linked directly to the Generationals and the Illimans in their home worlds. It would have been a revolution." "What signal did you bounce through Z-space, Polar?" I asked. "Well, can't you guess, my equatorial friend? Simple mathematical formulas at first for the earliest tests, but we had to see what the system could handle heavy data traffic." "Mother Sky, you broadcast games! You bounced games through Z-space!" "Yes, brilliant, wasn't it?" Menno sneered. "Except for the slight small fact that some species don't know the difference between games and reality. These aliens are here to exterminate us because they've seen our games and believe them to be real. They think we make toys of other species, that we interfere with their development with utter indifference to the results. They aren't here to do evil. They're here to annihilate what they believe to be a race of murderers." If all of this is true, then man, the Capucins have some really big balls. Their ship seems to be made out of wet tissue paper, yet they go in guns a-blazing against, from their perspective, beings of godlike power, and oh my god, is that a parallel? I think that might be a parallel. Alright, Applegate, I'll give you a point on that one. I do wonder what other games the Ketrins might have designed and what the Capucins thought of them. These evil beings are of unlimited power. Also, they're pretty good at finding mines.